the mystery behind? This 1923 family photograph remained unsolved for generations until now. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of the Chicago Historical Society's archive room, casting long shadows across the polished wooden tables. Dr. Michelle Torres carefully lifted the aged photograph from its protective sleeve, her gloved hands trembling slightly as she studied the sepia-toned image that had captivated her for weeks. 5 people stood in a formal pose against the backdrop of what appeared to be a modest home on the south side of Chicago. The year was 1923, printed neatly on the back in faded ink. A dignified older couple stood at the center, the father in a pressed suit, the mother in a high-necked dress with careful embroidery. Flanking them were 3 grown children, 2 sons and a daughter, all dressed in their Sunday finest. At first glance, they appeared to be a typical African-American family of the 1920s, prosperous enough to afford professional photography. But something in the photograph had puzzled Michelle since she first discovered it in her grandmother's attic 3 months ago. The eldest son, standing on the father's right, looked different from his siblings. His skin showed a patchwork of light and dark areas, creating an almost map-like pattern across his face and hands. The contrast was stark, even in the faded sepia tones, as if he existed between 2 worlds. Michelle leaned closer, studying the young man's face. Despite the unusual pigmentation, his features were unmistakably those of his family, the same strong jawline as his father, the same high cheekbones as his mother. But his eyes held something different, a profound sadness mixed with defiant dignity. "Dr. Torres?" A voice interrupted her concentration. James Wilson, the archive's senior curator, approached with documents. "I found the census records you requested, the Johnson family, South Side, 1920 and 1930. Michelle accepted the papers eagerly. For 3 months, she had been trying to understand the story behind this photograph. Her grandmother, dying at 97, had whispered fragmented memories about Uncle Samuel, who looked like a patchwork quilt. The census records confirmed Robert and Dorothy Johnson, along with their children, Samuel, age 28, Marcus, age 25, and Helen, age 22. But in the 1930 census, Samuel's name had vanished completely. Michelle picked up the photograph again, studying Samuel's face with renewed intensity. Whatever had happened to him, she was determined to uncover it. Michelle spread the contents of her grandmother's trunk across her apartment floor. Letters, newspaper clippings, and faded receipts formed a mosaic of the Johnson family's life in 1920s Chicago. The autumn wind rattled the windows as she worked late into the night. She picked up a brittle envelope postmarked June 1924. The letter inside was written in elegant cursive, addressed to "My dearest mother and father," and signed "Your son, Samuel." "The condition continues to spread despite Dr. Wilson's treatments," Michelle read aloud. "My hands are now half transformed, and I can no longer hide it when I work at the shop. Mr. Henderson dismissed me yesterday. He said customers were uncomfortable, that they whispered about disease. I see the fear in people's eyes, Mama, and no explanation seems to ease it." Michelle's medical background immediately suggested vitiligo, a condition causing loss of skin pigment in patches. For a black man in 1920s Chicago, it carried implications far beyond appearance. She searched through medical journals from the 1920s. What she found went beyond medical descriptions. Articles warned of social complications in the Negro population, the confusion it might cause in racial classification. A 1922 research paper made her pause. Patient S.J., male, 26 years old, progressive vitiligo affecting approximately 40% of visible skin. Patient reports loss of employment, social isolation, and threats from both white and colored communities. The initials, the age, the timeline. It had to be Samuel. Her phone rang. It was Dr. Raymond Foster, a dermatologist colleague. "Michelle, I found Samuel Johnson in Cook County Hospital files from 1921 to 1929. The physician's notes are heartbreaking. Starting in 1925, there are notes about social interventions and recommendations that the patient consider relocation to avoid racial complications." Michelle downloaded the scanned documents. One entry from 1926 stood out. "Patient expresses fear of violence from white citizens who may perceive him as attempting to pass, and equal fear of rejection from his own community. Patient became visibly distressed, stating he cannot live as a ghost." Samuel hadn't just been dealing with a medical condition. He'd been caught in an impossible situation, his body becoming dangerous in a society obsessed with clear racial boundaries. Evelyn Thompson's voice crackled through Michelle's phone speaker. At 92, calling from a Detroit nursing home, she was Marcus Johnson's daughter, one of the few who remembered hearing about the uncle who disappeared. "My father spoke about Uncle Samuel only once that I recall," Evelyn said carefully. "I was maybe 14, and I'd found an old photograph in the attic. When I asked Papa who the man with the spotted skin was, he got this look like I'd opened a wound. He told me to put it away and never speak of it." Michelle sat in her office, recording every word. Outside, November rain matched her racing heartbeat. "Did he ever tell you what happened to Samuel?" A long pause. "Years later, when Papa was dying in 1982, he told me something. The morphine loosened his tongue about things he'd kept locked away. He said Samuel was the smartest of all of them, wanted to be a lawyer to fight for civil rights. But the vitiligo took all that away." "How?" "Papa said that in those days, being black meant knowing your place, knowing where you belonged. The South Side was their world. But Samuel's skin kept changing. By 1925, he looked half white, half black, and that terrified everyone." Michelle leaned forward. "Why would that terrify them?" "Child, you have to understand what it was like. If white folks saw Samuel and thought he was white, then found out he lived in a black neighborhood, there could be violence, real violence. And if black folks thought he was trying to pass, that was its own betrayal. Samuel was trapped." The weight settled over Michelle. Samuel's body had made him dangerous to everyone he loved. "Papa said the last time he saw Samuel was Christmas 1928. The family gathered, trying to pretend everything was normal, but Samuel sat in the corner, barely speaking. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Just a note saying he couldn't stay, that his presence put everyone at risk." Michelle studied the photograph with new understanding. This wasn't just a man with a medical condition. This was someone watching his entire life dissolve. "Mrs. Thompson, do you know where he went?" "Papa mentioned Detroit once, but he never knew for sure. They never heard from him again." The Greyhound bus rumbled through darkness as Michelle traveled to Detroit. She'd spent 2 weeks following leads. A death certificate in Wayne County had caught her attention. Samuel Robert Johnson, Negro male, age 64, died March 15th, 1959. The dates aligned perfectly. If this was the same Samuel, he had lived another 31 years after disappearing, dying alone in a city where no one knew his story. Patricia Coleman, archivist at the Detroit Historical Museum, waited in the research library. "After you called, I started digging through Ford Motor Company employment records. I found this." She handed Michelle a personnel file. Samuel R. Johnson, hired January 1929 as a janitor at River Rouge plant. The identification photograph showed an older Samuel, his face thinner and worn. The vitiligo had progressed significantly, but his eyes still held that mixture of sadness and dignity. "He worked there for 30 years, Patricia said quietly. "Consistent attendance, no disciplinary issues. But there's something else." She opened another folder containing incident reports. In 1934, Samuel was attacked by 3 white workers who accused him of trying to pass for white. He was hospitalized for a week with broken ribs and a concussion. When Ford investigated, several black workers defended him, explaining about his vitiligo. The white workers were fired, but Samuel requested transfer to the night shift. Michelle felt tears stinging her eyes. Even in a new city, Samuel couldn't escape the violence his condition provoked. "Did he have any friends? Family here?" Patricia shook her head. "That's what's tragic. I searched church rolls, social clubs, neighborhood directories. Samuel appears nowhere except employment records and his death certificate. He lived like a ghost for 3 decades. There must be something else." Patricia hesitated, then pulled out a final document. A letter, found in his boarding house after he died. The landlady kept it with his possessions, thinking someone might claim them. No one ever did. The letter was titled, "To Whoever Finds This," dated December 25th, 1958, 3 months before Samuel's death. Michelle sat alone in the museum's reading room. The letter spread before her. Patricia had given her privacy, understanding the sacredness of this moment. "I'm writing this on Christmas Day, alone in my room as I have been for 30 years of Christmas days," Samuel had written. "I'm 64 years old, and I have lived more than half my life as a stranger to myself and to the world. I write this so that someone, someday, might understand what it means to exist between categories that society insists must be absolute." Michelle read slowly, absorbing every word. Samuel described his life in Detroit with acceptance and quiet grief. He wrote about factory work, the endless repetition requiring no interaction, no explanation. "I chose the night shift because darkness erases distinctions. In dim light at 2 a.m., no one looks closely at skin color. I mop floors, empty trash, clean machinery. The work is honest, and it asks nothing except my labor." But Samuel revealed more than survival. He wrote about the library he visited every Sunday, the only public space where he felt safe. There he educated himself, reading law, history, philosophy. "I would have been a lawyer. I see that alternate life sometimes, like a ghost walking beside me. I see myself in a courtroom, fighting for justice. But that Samuel Johnson died in Chicago in 1928. I am what remains, a man who has learned to be invisible." The letter described the 1934 attack in detail. Samuel wrote about lying in the hospital, listening to nurses whisper, "The colored one who thinks he's white," they said. They could not conceive that I had never tried to pass, that I had never wanted to be anything other than what I was born to be, Samuel wrote. My skin changed without my permission. I'm still a Negro man. I'm still my father's son. But no one sees that. He described his careful, solitary life. A small church where he sat in the back. A boarding house run by a widow who asked only for rent. The same routes, the same stores, existing in the margins. I have not spoken to my family since 1928. I wonder if they are still alive, if Marcus married, if Helen had children. I wonder if my mother ever forgave me for leaving. Samuel's letter continued, revealing a life more complex than Michelle imagined. While isolated, he hadn't been entirely disconnected from the world. In 1935, I met a man named Jacob at the library, Samuel wrote. He was a Jewish immigrant, a tailor who had fled Germany. He too understood what it meant to be marked as other. We formed an unlikely friendship, built on silence and understanding. We would sit together, reading, saying little. It was enough. Michelle discovered Patricia had found records of Jacob Stein, a tailor operating a shop on Detroit's east side from 1933 until 1956. The shop's ledgers showed regular entries for S. Johnson, suggesting Samuel had been a steady customer. Jacob taught me to sew, Samuel's letter continued. He said every man should know how to repair what is broken. He meant clothes, but I understood the deeper meaning. Some things cannot be repaired, only endured. Through the 1930s and 40s, Samuel did small tailoring jobs for factory workers, mending clothes and altering suits. Work he could do alone in his room. The money bought books, allowed him small dignity. Jacob died 2 years ago. I attended his funeral, standing at the back of the synagogue, the only colored person present. His son thanked me for coming. He said his father had called me a man of great strength and greater sorrow. I did not know how to respond. The letter revealed another relationship with Dr. Thomas Wright, one of Detroit's few black physicians. Samuel had begun seeing him in 1940, not for vitiligo treatment, but for general care and something deeper. Dr. Wright has become a confidant. He is the only person who knows my full story. He has urged me to reconnect with my family, offered to help. But I cannot. Too many years have passed. I would be a stranger now. The letter's final pages revealed that in 1950, Samuel began volunteering at a home for elderly colored residents, helping with maintenance every Saturday. The elderly residents do not fear me. Perhaps they have lived long enough to see beyond surface appearances. There is a woman named Mrs. Clara, 91, who calls me the Patchwork Angel. She says I remind her that God makes all kinds of beautiful things. Michelle's search for Dr. Thomas Wright's records led to his grandson, Dr. Marcus Wright, a retired physician in Detroit's Palmer Woods. When she explained her research, there was a long pause. Samuel Johnson, my grandfather spoke about him, said he was one of the most remarkable men he'd ever known. Come to my house. I have something you need to see. Dr. Marcus Wright's study was lined with medical texts and family photographs. He pulled out a leather-bound journal from a locked cabinet. My grandfather kept detailed notes on certain patients, observations about their lives, their struggles. Samuel Johnson has an entire section. The first entry read, December 3rd, 1940. New patient, Samuel Johnson, age 46. Immediately noted advanced vitiligo, affecting approximately 85% of visible skin. Patient's affect is guarded, speech educated. Upon questioning, revealed he is from Chicago, lived in Detroit 11 years, has no family contact. When I asked why he sought care after so long, he said, I'm tired of being invisible, even to myself. I sense profound isolation beyond his physical condition. The entries chronicled not just Samuel's health, but his psychological state, his fears, rare moments of hope. Dr. Wright had become Samuel's advocate, counselor, perhaps his only real friend. March 15th, 1942. Samuel spoke today about his brother Marcus, wondered if he married, has children. I urged him to write a letter. He refused, stating he died to his family in 1928, and it would be cruel to resurrect that grief. June 22nd, 1945. The war has ended. Samuel tried to enlist in 1942, but was rejected. The recruiter couldn't determine his race classification for segregated units. He said it was final proof he belongs nowhere. Michelle read through years of entries, watching Samuel age through Dr. Wright's observations, physical ailments, but also notes about his inner life. He had memorized poetry, could recite legal precedents, had opinions on politics that impressed Dr. Wright. November 8th, 1955. Samuel brought me a book today, a first edition of The Souls of Black Folk by Du Bois. He'd been saving for 3 years. Inside, he wrote, To the only man who sees me whole. I was moved to tears. Dr. Marcus Wright set down his grandfather's journal and pulled out a small wooden box. After Samuel died, my grandfather was one of few people at his funeral. Maybe 10 people there. Factory workers, the widow who ran his boarding house, elderly people from the home where he volunteered. My grandfather said it was the saddest funeral he'd ever attended because each person knew only a fragment of who Samuel truly was. Michelle listened as Dr. Wright continued. My grandfather paid for Samuel's burial in Woodlawn Cemetery. He couldn't bear the thought of a pauper's grave, and he kept some of Samuel's belongings. He opened the box, revealing wire-rimmed reading glasses, letters tied with string, a worn copy of Langston Hughes's poetry, and a photograph. Michelle gasped. The same 1923 family photograph, but this copy was more worn, edges frayed from countless handlings. He carried this for 30 years, Dr. Wright said softly. When they went through Samuel's room, they found this photograph on his nightstand. He'd been looking at it when he died. Michelle felt tears streaming as she held the photograph Samuel had treasured. On the back, in faded pencil, Papa Robert, Mama Dorothy, Samuel, Marcus, Helen, Chicago, 1923, the last time we were all together. Dr. Wright handed her the letters. These are letters Samuel wrote but never sent, all addressed to his family in Chicago. My grandfather found them in a drawer, decades worth of unsent correspondence. He had no way of finding Samuel's family, and Samuel made him promise never to contact them. So he kept them, hoping someday someone would come looking. Michelle carefully untied the string. They were dated sporadically, 1929, 1933, 1940, 1947, 1955. Each began Dear Mama and Papa, or Dear Marcus and Helen. A letter from 1933. Dear Mama, I wonder if you still make those butter cookies every Christmas. I can smell them in my memory. I work at the Ford plant now. It's honest work. I think about you every day. I hope you can forgive me for leaving. From 1947. Dear Marcus, I wonder if you have children now. I imagine you're a good father, patient and strong like Papa. I would have liked to be an uncle, but that life wasn't meant for me. Michelle returned to Chicago with copies of Dr. Wright's journal, Samuel's unsent letters, and the photograph that had accompanied him through 3 decades of exile. She felt the weight of responsibility to tell Samuel's story truthfully to honor his memory. Her first call was to Evelyn Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, I found him. I found Uncle Samuel. Silence, then a sharp breath. He's been found? He died in 1959 in Detroit. But I found his story. I found letters he wrote to your father, to his parents, to his sister. He never forgot you. He never stopped being part of the family. Michelle spent the next hour telling Evelyn everything. When she finished, the elderly woman was crying. My father died not knowing what happened to his brother. He carried that grief his whole life. I wish I could tell him that Samuel was okay, that he survived, that he never stopped loving us. I think your father knew, Michelle said gently. On some level, he always knew. Over following weeks, Michelle pieced together the complete picture. She contacted the nursing home where Samuel volunteered and found records of 8 years of faithful service. She tracked employment records, showing his 30-year Ford tenure. She found library cards, evidence of an active, curious mind that never stopped learning. Most significantly, she found Samuel's grave. Dr. Wright had paid for proper burial. The headstone read, Samuel Robert Johnson, 1894-1959, a man of dignity. No other markers, no indication of family, no flowers in 60 years. Michelle stood at the grave on a cold February morning, looking at the weathered stone. She thought about the young man in the 1923 photograph, standing proud beside his family. You're not forgotten anymore, she said aloud. I promise you that. She had arranged for Evelyn and other Johnson descendants to travel to Detroit. They would hold a memorial service, finally acknowledging Samuel, claiming him as their own. But first, Michelle had one more discovery. Dr. Wright's journal mentioned Samuel kept a personal notebook. The landlady had given it to Dr. Wright, but it wasn't in the box. Michelle called Dr. Marcus Wright. The notebook? Do you know what happened to it? A pause. My grandfather left instructions. If anyone came looking for Samuel's story, we should give them the notebook. Come back to Detroit. The notebook was leather-bound and small, designed to fit in a pocket. Dr. Marcus Wright handed it to Michelle with ceremonial care. My grandfather read this after Samuel died. He said it was the most profound thing he'd ever read, a testament to human resilience and dignity. Michelle opened the notebook with trembling hands. Unlike the unsent letters, this was clearly private, Samuel's most intimate thoughts. The first entry was dated January 15th, 1929. I am in a new city, and I am already exhausted by the pretense of newness. I'm not new. I'm not starting over. I am simply continuing to exist in a different location, carrying the same burden. But perhaps here I can find some measure of peace. The entries chronicled Samuel's first years in Detroit, struggling to find work, seeking night employment, constructing a life in the margins. But they also revealed something extraordinary, Samuel's intellectual life. He wrote about books he read, offering detailed analyses of philosophy, literature, politics. He recorded thoughts on the Harlem Renaissance, the Great Depression, fascism in Europe. These were thoughts of a brilliant mind denied its proper outlet. March 1933. Read today that Roosevelt has been inaugurated. His New Deal promises hope for many, but what hope for men like me? I am neither one thing nor another. I cannot benefit from programs for Negroes because I do not look the part. I cannot access opportunities for whites because I am not truly white. I exist in between, and in America there is no in between. As Michelle read through decades, she watched Samuel age, watched initial hope give way to acceptance to philosophical wisdom about his place in the world. June 1950. Began volunteering at the home for the elderly. Mrs. Clara called me an angel. I am no angel, but perhaps I can be of use. Perhaps this is my purpose, to serve those who, like me, have been pushed to the margins. The most powerful entries came from Samuel's final year, his handwriting shakier, thoughts more reflective. October 1958. I am 64, and I have lived 2 lives. The first ended when I was 34. The second has been a half-life, but I do not regret it. I made the choice that protected my family. Love sometimes looks like absence. The final entry, dated March 10th, 1959. I'm very tired now. The doctors say my lungs are failing. I'm not afraid of dying. I am only sorry I will die as I have lived alone. But perhaps in death I can finally return to my family. Perhaps in whatever comes after, there are no categories of skin color, no exile for those whose bodies refuse to conform. Michelle closed the notebook, overwhelmed. She sat in Dr. Wright's study for a long moment. Thank you, she finally said. Thank you for keeping his story safe. 3 days later, Michelle stood in Woodlawn Cemetery surrounded by 20 Johnson family members. Evelyn Thompson, wheelchair-bound but clear-eyed, had come. Marcus's and Helen's descendants had traveled from across the country. Michelle had arranged for a new headstone. Samuel Robert Johnson, 1894-1959. Beloved son, brother, uncle, scholar, worker, servant. His absence was not abandonment. His silence was not indifference. His exile was love's sacrifice. She read from Samuel's notebook, sharing his words with a family that had never stopped being his. She told them about his unsent letters, his work at Ford, his volunteer service, his friendship with Dr. Wright. When she finished, Evelyn spoke. Uncle Samuel, we never forgot you. My father spoke your name until he died. Your mother grieved for you every day. You were never erased from this family, and now we reclaim you fully. Welcome home. The family placed dozens of bouquets, transforming the plain plot into a garden of remembrance. They sang hymns Samuel would have known. Michelle donated Samuel's notebook, letters, and photograph to the DuSable Museum of African American History. She worked with curators to create an exhibition about his life. The exhibition opened 6 months later, titled Between Worlds, The Life of Samuel Johnson. It featured the 1923 family photograph, enlarged and prominently displayed. Samuel's story was told in his own words. On opening night, Michelle stood before the photograph with descendants of all 3 Johnson siblings. The mystery had been solved, but the solution brought no satisfaction, only profound sadness for a life lived in unnecessary exile and deep admiration for the man who endured it with grace. But there was also restoration. Samuel Johnson was no longer a whispered secret, no longer a name erased from records. He was fully realized, his story told, his dignity restored. He would have been proud, Evelyn said, looking at her uncle as a young man. Not of the suffering, but of this being remembered, being known, being loved across time. Michelle nodded, thinking about all the other Samuel Johnsons in history, people whose stories had been lost. She made a silent promise to keep searching, to keep telling these stories. The photograph of 5 people standing before a modest Chicago home in 1923 would never be a mystery again. It was a portrait of a family whose love transcended cruel boundaries. And at its center stood Samuel, marked by vitiligo, exiled by prejudice, but never forgotten.